The best way to introduce Buber's distinction is to think about how we relate to human beings. Now, Buber believes we can have I-it and I-thou relationships with works of art, with nature. He famously describes how we might relate to a tree as a thou, among other things. But human beings are certainly the most natural candidates for an I-thou relationship, and are thus the best examples to use. So let's take a look at this, and I'll try to populate a list that will hopefully coincide in many ways with yours. So think of an encounter with a waiter in a restaurant. You could likely tell me certain qualities or properties of the waiter, whether or not was a male or a female, the colour of the hair, whether or not they wear glasses, etc. That is, you could describe how you experience them through any number of descriptive categories that provide borders that distinguish your waiter, from others in time and space. Most important of all here, of course, is that this person is your waiter, and that you're therefore most interested in them taking your order and bringing you your food in a timely and hopefully gracious manner. Now, the point about this relationship is that you see this person as a means to an end. You're basically using this person as an object in order to satisfy a desire of yours, and as such, the way you relate to them is under a general description or as one of a type, in this case a waiter, and to be honest, any waiter would do. Relating to someone in this way is to relate to them as an it. You are in an I-it relationship with this person, a relationship for which Buber reserves the word experience. In this encounter, you experience something specific, the other person. And there's nothing wrong with relating to someone in this way. The world simply couldn't function if we didn't, as Buber admits. Without it, a human being cannot live. But the key point that Buber wishes to make is in the continuation of that quote. But whoever lives only with that is not human. Experiencing its is only one way of relating to things, and a way that would miss some of the most fundamental forms of human relationship if it were the only way. For there is also, by way of contrast, an I-thou relationship in which you do not relate to someone or something in this way simply by virtue of general descriptions that objectify the person and see him or her as something to be manipulated for your own experiences. In an I-thou relationship, in contrast, one is genuinely in relation with the other, or to use Buber's terminology, the relationship is dialogical. The sort of encounter one might have when one falls in love and is not thinking in terms of objective descriptions or how you can use the person in front of you. Instead, at that moment, you see your partner not as a thing among things, to quote Buber, but instead as something that fills the firmament. Most importantly for Buber, this type of dialogical relation is mutual. The I and the thou relate to each other in a reciprocal fashion. There is genuine dialogue here. Even if it isn't actually verbalized, it can just be contained in the way you look at a person. And of course, it's not true here that any person will do. It's this thou and this thou alone to whom you relate. It's also something that Buber tells us comes about through grace. It's not something you can chase or just summon at will. Now you can try and put yourself in a position to maybe be open to having such an encounter. Now, as may already be becoming clear, it's actually quite difficult to describe an I-thou relationship positively. The point is that in such a relationship, you are no longer thinking of the person as an it, or in terms of objective descriptions of that person, whether in terms of how they look or what they can do for you. Instead, as Buber puts it, you're relating to the whole person with the whole of your being. Now, Buber speaks here of relating to this person immediately, by which he simply means unmediated by any sort of general description, and instead you're relating to that person as they are, as a whole, and in their uniqueness. Think of being totally swept up and lost in a piece of music, for example. It's possible to experience music, to hear a piece and think of the key it's being played in, the notes being played, the particular instruments being used, etc. But it's also possible to simply be swept up in the music without consciously thinking of any of this, of being in relation to the music rather than experiencing it, of forgetting for that instance where you are, as if you're indeed outside time and space. That's what it is to be in an I-thou relationship, and Buber's central idea is that such relationships are a necessary element of what it is to be human. But what's important about such a relationship is that it's not the sort of thing that can be effectively described using scientific methods, or indeed reached through scientific methods. Indeed, in a sense, it even eludes language. We can vaguely describe what an I-thou relationship is like, but we cannot really describe it in terms of giving, for example, necessary and sufficient conditions for an I-thou relationship. That would immediately reduce it to an I-it relationship. In fact, we can only recognize an I-thou relationship after the fact. If we're having one, then as soon as we realize we're having one, the spell is broken, and we're back in the world of I-it, since I'm now categorizing what I'm experiencing, and thus I'm no longer in an I-thou relationship. As Buber writes, only when I step out of this do I experience him as a thou again. We should also note that Buber thinks that we cannot define the I in isolation. It's always an I that's relating to either an it or a thou, and the I that emerges out of each of these relationships is different. So in large part we're defined for Buber by our relationships, and therefore, since we're constantly relating to different things in different ways, we're always in a state of becoming, or never finally defined as an isolated being in any essential fashion. As the existentialist said, remember, existence precedes essence.